So anyway, we're concepting here. We've got our concept sketch, and at all of these points, we're hitting our one-button solution, insert infinity, and throwing these into Engine, and copying weights and throwing it into game, so that we're running around and play testing all of these stages here. A couple of different examples of just really quick ways. So let's create this-ish. So, and again, we're just keeping it simple. We're not doing anything too super fancy. So I'm going to go back into ZBrush here, and let's say we want to do a pair of pants. So we've got our subtool here. I'm going to go ahead and say this is our armor. This is all fine. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tap. So while you have something selected, if you turn off the eyeball, it's going to turn off the eyeball. Or if you hold down Shift and turn off the eyeball, it'll turn off the eyeball for everybody. If you hold down Shift and turn it back on, all the eyeballs pop on. If you just want to turn the eyeball off for this one, you can just tap it. Or you can tap the nameplate. You can also just turn these eyeballs off. So now this one has the eyeball off, but you can still see it because it's selected. If you don't have it selected, now it disappears. So we got our base body again. So for example, like we were doing in our slides, let's talk about how to demo this pair of pants, and we'll also do the shirt as well. It's pretty easy. So I want to make a pair of pants, so I'm going to hold that Control. We're going to go to Mask Lasso, and we're just going to drag right across here, and that's where the pants are going to go. I'm going to hold down Control and then Mask Pin, and if you want to fine tune where this is going to go, you can also use Mask Curve, which we'll talk about in a bit. But there's where I want our pants to go. So now ZBrush is going to help us out with this. A lot of different ways to make a polygroup out of here. You can hit Control W, and that'll make a polygroup. Let's make that more obvious. So there's a polygroup here. If you want it to slice through here, sometimes that's useful. You can go down here to Geometry, Edge Loop, and you can do Edge Loop Mask Border, and that puts like a cleaner line through your mask here. So I'm going to actually do that. But one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate this off first, because I always like to be able to go back to my base mesh here. And then now I have this duplicate with just her pants. I'm going to go into solo mode, so I'm just looking at her, or you can just turn off the eyeball for her original base pants. So with that masked, again, go down here to Geometry, Edge Loop Mask Border, and now we have where her pants are going to go. So Control-Shift-Tap that polygroup here, and if you don't like seeing these lines, but you like seeing your polygroups, just turn off this little line button right there, and now you can just see that, or alternatively, you can turn off Fill, and then that gets rid of the colors. So we'll keep Fill on, turn Line off. Hold down Control-Shift, again, Geometry, Modify, Topology, Delete Hidden, and now we've got our pants. Now you can go through here, you can just Control-Drag, that'll re-Dynamesh. The Dynamesh is still activated, so that'll go ahead and cap her off for you. By default, Dynamesh runs a Geometry, Modify, Topology, Close Holes operation first. If you want to do that manually, you can just go here, hit Close Holes, and then Dynamesh, it'll do the exact same thing. You can still isolate these faces, and if we turn her base body back on, you can go through here, and just start concepting out our pants. However, when I'm doing cloth sculpting, what I like, let's undo back to where we just had our regular geometry here. What I like to do is have subdivision history. Even for just a sketch, even if it's just a garbage throwaway sculpt, it's simple enough just to go through here, go to Geometry, go down here to ZRemesher, and I have X symmetry turned on. That's important. I'm going to say target polygon count of 5 is fine. We're at 156,000 now. You can also say half if you want to. The adaptive size I'm going to crank down to 0. The lower this is, the more even your quads are going to be. The higher it is, the more it looks at your edge flow and tries to build in extra edges. So for faces and stuff, I'd probably keep this up a little bit. For just what I'm doing here, I'm just going to drop that down to 0, and we'll hit ZRemesh. Now again, we have X symmetry turned on, so it's going to be symmetrical across the X axis. And when this is done, you're going to see I get new geometry. And if you ever want to, you can also hold down Alt, and you can just ZRemesh from this point as well. So we can just hit ZRemesh again. It'll give me a new topology, and it goes a little bit faster because it's only evaluating these fewer polygons. If you hold down Alt and hit ZRemesher, that'll give you a new midline algorithm. So you can see I get a little bit of a different result there. And I can also now at this point go to half and hit ZRemesher. You can hold down Alt if you want a different algorithm. And just keep hitting that, and it's going to keep going further and further and further lower res. So here's my game res. It's not really a game res. You can use it as a game res, but I'm just going to use it as kind of a base. So at this point, I can go to BZM. That's my zmodeler brush. You can hover over a face, hit the space bar. We can Q-mesh, or we can extrude polygroup all, or all polygons in this case, and we can just extrude thickness out of here, or you can extrude thickness in. However, you're going to see when we extrude it in, everything looks fine, but let's say we go down here to deformation, and we want to inflate these pants a bit. And if I go in here and do a positive inflate, you're going to see it shrinks. And if I do a negative inflate, it grows. That means if we go down here to display properties, we have double turned on. Turn double off, and you hit flip, you can see with double turned off, you can see my vertex normals, my normals are flipped. So we can flip those back, and now inflate and deflate will behave as you would expect. The reason that happened, we go back to our original base mesh here, we had double turned on for her under display properties. So try and keep that turned off. It'll save you some headaches down the road. But anyway, we got a pair of pants on her. And again, with my ZModeler brush, if I go through here and I do an extrude or a Q mesh with, say, polygroup all, now it's just going to, extrude those individual polygroups here. I can also do a single poly, for example, and just pull one out. However, if you do a Q mesh or extrude polygroup all and you start extruding, you see how it adds an extra edge loop. If you don't want to do that, you just want to pull along the surface normals, just hold down shift, and that'll kind of inflate along the surface normal. So now we can go through here and we can just kind of inflate this out. We just did our ZRemesher, and I'm going to go back here. I already know it's going to be a problem, so I'm going to go down here. I'm going to turn off double. So now we have this. Now I don't want to just start sculpting. I mean, you can if you want to. You can like sculpt and then hit Control D to subdivide, and that's just adding subdivision history to our object here. But single-sided objects in ZBrush, and when we get into processing tools later for game reses, those they drive me up the wall. So I try to avoid doing that. And you can always do polygroups on single-sided, so if you ever want to get back to just a single-sided mesh, you can hold down Control Shift and isolate it from your caps, and you're good to go. So for example, instead of just going through here and extruding or Q meshing out, what I'm going to do is hover over an edge. We're going to go to Close, Convex Hole. Now if you do a convex hole, you can go through here and you can like do a convex hole like this. You can pull out an interactive elevation, but generally speaking, I'll just close it like this, and I'll go down here and close it. If you don't care about the polarized cap here, you can just do a regular old concave hole. That's not a mirrored operation, and you can even skip using ZModeler and just go to Geometry Modify Topology, Close Holes, and then I like to do a quick Geometry Modify Topology Mirror and Weld just to get that mirrored geometry across both sides. Interestingly enough, this actually does a pretty good job of giving you decent topology. If you ever use this, you can go through here and you can use collapse with your ZModeler brush. You can go through here and you can kind of collapse certain edges, and you can also go through here and just delete edge. So you can go through here, and if you go through and you start deleting these edges, you'll notice that it actually gives you pretty reasonable topology through here. So if you hold down Shift and start smoothing, you're going to see, okay, that's actually not bad. That's, you've got quads in here. You've got some triangles that you can go through and collapse if you want to. But in a pinch, if you want some automatic topology, you can use that close holes operation, go through, delete some edges, and it might give you a reasonable result. So now that we have this, again, we want to inflate these pants out just a tiny bit. So extrude polygroup all, hold down Shift to pull along that surface normal, and now we've got a pair of pants on her. At this point, if we hit divide, we have the smooth modifier turned on. If we hit divide, you're going to see it's going to average those vertices. I like to keep those a little bit tighter, at least to begin with. So we're going to go to Crease, PG. That'll crease my polygroup edges. So now when I hit divide, that'll keep that nice and crispy up here. We can divide again, and at any point, if we want to, if we turn on our polyframe, we're going to see this dotted line means that edge is creased. If we want to turn that off, we can do uncrease all, and now when I hit divide, it'll go ahead and uncrease it, and because we had pretty good subdivisions already, it gives me a nice bevel along that edge. Now the reason I like doing this with cloth is I can always go down to subdivision level 1 again, because now we have subdivision history, and we'll get into dynamic subdivisions later. Those are very, very useful. You can now go through here and start sculpting. And now, because we're sculpting, I like to do my main primary forms at lower subdivision levels. So you can go through here and you can like use your standard brush, and then when we get into details like gene puckering, and you can also use your inflate brush if you want to do a quick inflate pass just to make sure it's covering her skin. You can go through and inflate. Now, because we capped it, I don't need to worry about inside faces. It's not a thin mesh. It's just it's a capped mesh here. So you can go through here and you can step through your subdivision history or hit Control D, and now we're able to go through and start sculpting. Now you're going to see by default, if I go up here to the stroke menu, lazy mouse is turned on. It's a lazy radius of 1 for my standard brush. If I crank this up, you're going to see that line that comes out. That makes it a very smooth stroke. You can toggle lazy mouse on and off by tapping the L key. So if you want it off, just tap L. If you want it on, you can tap L. And if you want to make that more or less smooth of a stroke, just go up here to your stroke menu and then crank this lazy radius down to something that's a little bit more palatable. You can go up here to this undo history and you can just drag backwards, and that'll go through your undos. And now you can just go through here and you can smooth, you can inflate, and you can just sculpt your primary and secondary forms. Now, you may also notice on my YouTube channel, I have a Marvelous and ZBrush Quick Start. If you're proficient in Marvelous and you have avatars, you can even export this as an avatar and templates already set up. You can very quickly create, even for concepts, very, very quick cloth instead of going through here and sculpting it. But because we're on Pixelogic's channel, I'm not going to go into that just yet, but it's fairly simple, and you can go to my YouTube channel if you want to see more on that. And but again, because we're just concepting here, and I did control drag and I did Dynamesh, so you're gonna have to be careful. If you don't want to Dynamesh anymore, I mean, you can if you want to, but in this case, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to Geometry, Dynamesh, turn that off, and now I don't have to worry about control dragging and accidentally Dynameshing. So we can go through here, and again, details and stuff like this I'm not gonna do just yet. I'm just doing primary reads, the long forms, and then where it bunches around the knee and the leg, and depending on what type of cloth you're making, that's where a good reference comes in. And even if it's just you wearing a pair of jeans that you take with your phone and just take pictures in the round, it's very, very useful. Or use Marvelous Designer, or learn how to sculpt cloth. That's not my favorite thing in the world to do, but you can start sculpting your primary and secondary forms. You can continue to subdivide, so hit Control D or just hit this divide key, and now you're going through and you're sculpting.